Hey everybody, I brought with me one of my favorite Christmas stories. This one is called The Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomey. And it's a little bit long, but settle back and listen to what an amazing story this is. The village children called him Mr. Gloomy, but in fact his name was Toomey, Mr. Jonathan Toomey. And though it's not kind to call people names, this one fit quite well, for Jonathan Toomey seldom smiled and never laughed. He went about mumbling and grumbling, muttering and sputtering, grumping and griping. And there he is, looking down. Mr. Toomey was a wood carver. Some said he was the best wood carver in the whole valley. Jonathan Toomey wasn't an old man, but if you saw him, you might think he was, the way he walked, bent forward with his head down, and his beard all scraggly. There he is. The village people didn't know it, but there was a reason for his gloom, a reason for his grumbling, a reason why he walked hunched over as if carrying a great weight on his shoulders. Some years earlier, when Jonathan Toomey was a young man and full of life and full of love, his wife and baby had become very sick. And because those were the days before hospitals and medicines and skilled doctors, his wife and baby died 3 days apart from each other. So Jonathan Toomey had packed his belongings into a wagon and traveled until his tears stopped. He settled into a tiny house at the edge of a village to do his wood carving. There he is, kind of alone. One day in early December, there was a knock at Jonathan's door. Mumbling and grumbling, he went to answer it. There stood a young woman and a young boy. "I'm the widow McDonald. I'm new in your village. This is my son, Thomas," she said. "I'm 7 and I know how to whistle," said Thomas. "Whistling is pish-posh," said the wood carver gruffly. "I need something carved," said the woman, and she told Jonathan about a very special set of Christmas figures her grandfather had carved for her when she was a girl. "After I moved here, I discovered they were lost, and I hoped by some miracle I would find them again, but it hasn't happened." "There are no such thing as miracles," the wood carver told her. "Now, could you describe the figures for me?" "There were sheep. 2 of them with curly wool," added Thomas. "Yes, 2. And a cow, an angel, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and the wise men." "3 of them," added Thomas. "Will you take the job?" asked the widow McDowell. "I will." "I'm grateful. How soon can you have them ready?" "They'll be ready when they're ready," he said. "But I must have them by Christmas. They mean very much to me." "Christmas is pish-posh," said Jonathan gruffly, and he shut the door. The following week there was a knock at the door. Muttering and sputtering, he went to answer it. There stood the widow McDowell and Thomas. "Excuse me," said the widow, "but Thomas has been begging to come and watch you work. He says he wants to be a wood carver when he grows up, and he would like to watch you since you're the best in the valley." "I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here. Please, please," piped in Thomas. With a grumble, the wood carver stepped aside to let them in. He pointed to a stool near the workbench and said, "No talking, no giggling, no jiggling, no noise." After a very long time, Thomas cleared his throat and whispered, "Mr. Toomey, may I ask a question?" The wood carver glared at Thomas, then shrugged his shoulders and grunted. Thomas decided that meant yes, so he went on. "Is that my sheep you're carving?" The wood carver nodded and grunted again. After another very long time, Thomas whispered, "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving my sheep wrong." The widow McDowell's knitting needles stopped clicking. Jonathan Toomey's knife stopped carving. Thomas went on, "It's a beautiful sheep, nice and curly, but my sheep looked happy." "That's pish-posh," said Mr. Toomey. "Sheep are sheep. They cannot look happy." "Mine did," answered Thomas. "They knew they were with the baby Jesus, so they were happy." After that, Thomas was quiet the rest of the afternoon, until it was time for them to go. That evening, after supper, the woodcarver sat down at his bench again. He picked up his knife, and he worked on the sheep until his eyelids couldn't stay open anymore. A few days later, there was another knock at the door again, and there was the widow and her son. "May I watch again?" "I'll be quiet," said Thomas. So he sat down very quietly while his mother laid a basket of sweet-smelling raisin buns on the table. "The teapot is warm," Mr. Toomey said gruffly. While Mr. Toomey carved, the widow McDowell poured tea. She touched the woodcarver gently on the shoulder and placed a cup of tea and a bun next to him. He pretended not to notice, but pretty soon, both the plate and the cup were empty. After a very long time, Thomas whispered, "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, may I ask a question?" Grunt. "Is that my cow you're carving?" Nod and grunt. Another very long time went by. Then Thomas cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but I must tell you something. That's a beautiful cow, the most beautiful cow I have ever seen, but it's not right. My cow looked proud." "That's pish-posh," growled the woodcarver. "Cows are cows. They cannot look proud." "My cow did. It knew that Jesus chose to be born in his barn, so it was proud." Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon until it was time for them to leave. That evening, after supper, the woodcarver sat down at his bench and he carved on the cow for a very long time until his eyelids would not stay open. A few days later, there's a knock on the door. He smoothed down his hair as he went to answer, and there were the widow and her son. "Can I watch again?" asked Thomas. Mrs. McDowell warmed the tea and put a plate of fresh molasses cookies on the workbench. Thomas watched the woodcarver work on the figure of an angel. After a very long time, Thomas spoke. "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, is that my angel you're carving?" "Yes, and would you do me the favor of telling me exactly what I'm doing wrong?" "Well, my angel looked like one of God's most important angels because it was sent to baby Jesus." "And just how does one make an angel look important?" asked the woodcarver. "You'll be able to do it," said Thomas. "You're the best woodcarver in the valley." After another very long time, Thomas spoke. "Mr. Toomey, excuse me, may I ask a question?" "Do you ever stop talking?" asked the woodcarver. "My mother says I don't. She says I could learn about the virtue of silence from you." Under his beard, the woodcarver's face turned pink. The widow McDowell's face turned as red as the scarf she was knitting. "Well, speak up. What is your question?" "Will you please teach me to carve?" "I'm a very busy man," grumbled the woodcarver, but he put down the important angel. "You will carve a bird." "A robin, I hope," said Thomas. "I like robins." With a piece of charcoal, the woodcarver sketched a robin on a piece of brown paper. He handed Thomas a small block of pine and a knife, and he showed him how to lop off the corners and slowly smooth the edges of the wood into curves. Thomas copied the woodcarver's strokes all afternoon, and when the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Jonathan Toomey was holding Thomas's hand in his and guiding the knife along the edge of a wing. He didn't even hear them ringing. The widow McDowell said it was time to leave. So, after supper, Mr. Toomey went to his workbench again. He picked up his carving knife, he picked up the angel, and he carved until his eyelids drooped shut again. A few days later, there's a knock on the door. Mr. Toomey jumped up to answer it. There stood the widow McDowell with a bouquet of pine boughs, and Thomas was clutching his partly carved robin. While Thomas and Mr. Toomey carved, Mrs. McDowell put the bouquet in a jar of water. "Next, I will carve the wise men and Joseph," the woodcarver said to Thomas. "Perhaps before I will begin, you will tell me about the mistakes that I'm going to make." "Well," Thomas said, "my wise men were wearing the most wonderful robes because they were going to visit Jesus, and my Joseph was leaning over baby Jesus like he was protecting him. He looked very serious." That evening, after supper, the woodcarver worked on Joseph and the wise men until his eyelids drooped shut. few days later, there's a knock on the woodcarver's door. He dusted the crumbs from his beard and brushed the sawdust from his shirt. At the door were the widow McDowell and Thomas. All afternoon, Thomas watched the woodcarver work. When it was time to leave, Jonathan said to Thomas, "I'm about to begin the last two figures, Mary and the baby. Can you tell me how your figures looked?" "They were the most special of all," said Thomas. "Jesus was smiling and reaching up to his mother, and Mary looked like she loved him very much." "Thank you, Thomas," said the woodcarver. "Tomorrow is Christmas. Is there any chance the figures will be ready?" the widow McDowell said. "They'll be ready when they're ready." "I understand," said the widow, and she handed Jonathan 2 packages. "Merry Christmas," she said. Jonathan folded his arms across his chest. "I want no presents," he said harshly. "That's exactly why we're giving them," answered the widow. She put them down on the table and left. Jonathan sat down at the table. Slowly he opened the first package. Inside was a red scarf, hand-knit, warm and bright. He tied the scarf around his neck. The other package held a robin, crudely carved of pine. A smile twitched at the corners of Jonathan's mouth as he ran his fingers over the lopsided wings. He dusted the fireplace mantel with his sleeve and placed the robin exactly in the center so he could see it from his chair. The woodcarver did not eat supper that night. Instead, he began to sketch the final figures, Mary and Jesus. He drew sketch after sketch and crumpled them up and threw them on the floor until there was a mountain of crumpled paper at his feet. He picked up the block of wood and tried to carve, but his knife would not do what he wanted it to do. He hurled the chunk of wood into the fireplace and sat staring into the flames. When he heard the church bells announcing the midnight Christmas service, he got up. Slowly he opened the door beneath the cupboard. From it, he took out a rough woolen shawl and a lace handkerchief. He took out a tiny white baby blanket and a little pair of blue socks. He placed each piece gently on the floor. From the bottom of the drawer, he lifted out a picture frame. In the frame was a charcoal sketch of a woman sitting in a rocking chair holding a baby. The baby's arms were reaching up, touching the woman's face. The woman was looking down at the baby, smiling. Jonathan sat down in the rocking chair and held the picture against his chest. He rocked slowly, his eyes closed. 2 tears trailed into his beard. When he finally took the picture to his workbench and began to carve, his fingers worked quickly and surely, and he carved all through the night. The next day, there was a knock on the widow McDowell's door. When she opened it, there stood the woodcarver, his neck wrapped in a red scarf, holding a wooden box stuffed with straw. "Mr. Toomey," said the widow, "what a surprise! Merry Christmas!" "The figures are ready," he said as he stepped inside. From the box, Jonathan unpacked 2 curly sheep, happy sheep, because they were with Jesus. He unpacked a proud cow and an angel, a very important angel, with mighty wings stretching from its shoulders right down to the hem of its gown. He packed 3 wise men wearing the most wonderful robes, edged with fur and falling in rich folds. He unpacked a serious and caring Joseph. He unpacked Mary, wearing a rough woolen shawl, looking down lovingly at her precious baby son. Jesus was smiling and touching his mother's face. That day, Jonathan went to the Christmas service with the widow McDowell and Thomas. And that day, in the churchyard, the village children saw Jonathan throw back his head, showing his eyes as clear blue as the August sky, and laugh. And no one ever called him Mr. Gloomy again. Isn't that a wonderful story? You know, you think about the kindness that Thomas and his mother showed him. I think about the verse in Colossians. It says, "Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And that's what they showed. And little by little, that wood carver stopped saying pish-posh about everything. And he ended up going with them to services on Christmas Day. That's a wonderful example of how our kindness can reach out even to the grumpiest people. So have a wonderful week, friends, and look for someone that you can be kind to today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.